Welcome to We Hear Her. I'm Erin Trenbeth Murray, and I'm here today with another amazing woman who is sharing her story and insights into life lessons learned. Hi, I'm Erin Trenbeth Murray, and we are here for the We Hear Her podcast for women who succeed. I'm here today with a fairly new member, Robin Huling, correct?
Yes.
And excited to have her here. A little intimidated because her expertise and background is in communications, effective communication, and I'm excited to dive into that professional career a little bit. But let me tell you a little bit about her from her bio, which I just found out. One thing I want to add in that we're going to get into is she's from Florida, where I just got back from. Absolutely amazing. I want to hear all about your work at Disney and that little span of life. But Robin is a seasoned leadership and development consultant and speaker, and brings with her over 2 decades of experience utilizing and specializing natural behavior and communication styles. Throughout her career, Robin has honored her expertise during tenures with prestigious global brands such as Universal Studios, Planet Hollywood, Walt Disney World, and Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. Her passion lies in team building and leadership training, and she possesses a profound understanding of DISC theory. DISC?
Yes.
I need to know more about that.
Yes.
And I understand that you do quite a bit now, specifically with an inclusion element, and I'm excited to learn about that. Let me also tell you a little bit about Robin personally. She's been here for about 10 years, and we're going to hear how her husband dragged her here. She has 4 children, correct? And is now holding the position of chair for Silicon Slopes Women in Leadership and chair of Women in Business at the West Jordan Chamber of Commerce. Holy cow.
I know, I jumped
You've
all
got a
in.
bit going on here.
I did. I jumped all in last summer. I decided to emerge myself from the bubble I had put myself in, and really get my feet on the ground here in the business development startup ecosystem that's thriving here in Utah.
It's crazy. And a fun, energetic, the entrepreneurs and all of that spirit that's running rampant.
Yeah. So when we moved here, we can talk about Orlando and Disney a little bit, but when we moved here, I had started this side business where my oldest daughter was born. Beautiful baby girl, but she was bald with about the same size head she has now. And so I Googled how to make hair bows, and I started making hair bows for her, and it was the right time, right place, and I created a market.
What?
I know, right? So I started my little boutique, Ella's Bows, back as a side business in Orlando. And so when my husband's job asked him to move out here, I was going to have to leave my career, and I decided to go all in into my bow business. And it was really exciting. It was the right time around 2008, 2009, where the bubble crashed, when But unbeknownst to myself at the time, the baby industry was the only industry thriving. And so I was able to really get in at the market at the right time, where Facebook was starting up and you could create business pages for free, and Pinterest had started and Etsy had started. And so I really was fortunate enough to get right at the forefront of the crafting and selling from home.
Oh my gosh, the
business.
timing, luck, foresight, all of those worlds coming together.
I think a lot of people miss that, of like a lot of it is luck and being at the right time in the right place. One of the best advice I got from actually Susan Peterson, who's a local business owner here, was having the kindling ready and prepared when lightning strikes. So you never know when it's going to strike. You never know when you're going to be approached, or your business is going to be on the cusp of success. But are you ready when it is and when it hits?
Oh my gosh, I love that. Have the kindling prepared for when lightning strikes.
Yeah, so you can keep it burning. So you're ready.
Are you still involved in the business?
So with Ella's Bows, and what's interesting about that is it wasn't ever my passion. I just got in at the right time. And once I stopped having little girls and babies to dress, it just wasn't as interesting to me anymore. And one of the things that really got me passionate about going into the women in business for my local West Jordan Chamber of Commerce is because I know there's so many women that are like me that are very entrepreneurial driven, multi-talented in their navigation, but don't utilize the resources around them. And so when I was going at the peak of my business with the boutique, I didn't have an exit strategy in place. And so when it came time to sell the company and working with a vendor, I did not have the moving parts in place, and I didn't read small print and fine print when I got started. And so I thought, well, we'll just leave it for my kids. The shut down the website, because in 2020 is when we had to make the biggest decision. Going back, I don't know if there's this big overlap with my career in leadership. In 2019, I was falling out of love with the online business, and it was doing really successful. We were in People Magazine a couple times.
Just your life.
Changes.
Yeah.
I just wasn't passionate about it anymore, and I really wanted to focus on leadership development, which was my career back in Orlando. And I started doing some consulting with DISC. So DISC is the theory of effective communication. So it's what I am extremely passionate about for a high functioning team and partnerships, because a lot of the times we communicate and talk to each other with that whole golden rule, where you treat others the way you want to be treated. But with communication, that actually is doing a disservice, because we have to treat and talk to others the way that they receive and they want to be talked to. Yeah. And so effective communication skills like DISC theory, and if you've never heard of DISC, it's very similar to
Obviously
the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or Take Flight or Colors. They're all based on DISC theory. That's the godfather of it all. So in 2019, I know, well, it's any personality test is based on
DISC.
I love DISC because for me it's like the Jiffy Lube, like quick, easy. Let's just figure it out and move on. Like, oh, I understand. Let's enact. So in 2019, I started doing more consulting for teams and local businesses. But I was flying out the day to attend an event in California the day the world shut down for the apocalypse in 2020.
COVID?
Yeah, that was COVID. But interesting enough, I still had my Etsy store, and we had the baby boutique side running. And Etsy reached out to me to see if we could make face masks. And I was, sure, let's start it. And
oh, wow.
We call it the mask apocalypse in my home. And it was beyond crazy. And
we call it the zombie apocalypse.
I know, it was so hard.
Because I had sons during it.
I know. So we ended up making a ton of masks, and it was crazy. It was obscene because nobody could get back to work without doing it. And I was still in this mindset. I was giving out free how-tos, like how to make a mask out of a sock.
Sure.
But people didn't want to make them. And so it was really interesting because we were doing them in my basement at home. I mean, we still couldn't work. Walmart opened up with fabric. I got 20 seamsters. Anytime there was a woman at a counter cutting fabric, I was like, can you make masks for me? And so we did that for about a year and a half because it was about that long where people couldn't travel in public without face masks. And so we did that for about a year and a half, but it really took an emotional toll because it was hard. Kids I couldn't send my kids back to school.
Sure, the whole thing.
I couldn't risk them. We're selling masks. My husband lost his job during COVID, so he became my number one seamstress. I don't even sew. I mean, I would try to sew a couple masks, and my son was like, we can't send this.
You can't send this. And you're taking 4 times as long as us moms. So we're going to have to sideline you, and you just keep having the vision and the strategy. Well, tell me a little bit. Let's back. There's so many things that I wanted to dive into as you were talking because just fascinating. But tell me a little bit about your transition here to Utah and what precipitated that.
So my husband and I were married in 2001, and we thought we would start a family pretty early on, but that was not the plan for us. We suffered with infertility for about 7 years. And so in that time, which actually turned out to be a blessing for me in retrospect, because at the time I didn't do well in school. I didn't want to go back to school. And I thought, oh, I can just stay at home. I'll just stay home. And I was serving full time. And
serving as in a
serving
server,
at a restaurant. And so I had was a trainer in a business, well, not business, but restaurants. I would go help open up new restaurants, and I loved that. But traveling is a big deal, and it wears on you. So I thought, I'll just stay home and be a full-time mom, and that didn't happen. And so an opportunity came up for leadership development at Universal Studios, and I took that position, and it was the most exciting, the best decision I made, and loved it. And then, of course, a year later, we get pregnant, when everything's going well.
But 7 years of infertility.
7 years of infertility.
What a struggle for so many women, and I'm sure there are women that are watching, and men that are they're trying to create a family or expand their family. What do you think would be some advice / guidance, or what that helped you in those really difficult months when you're like, is this ever going to happen? And what if it doesn't? And
what if it doesn't?
What does
that
that mean?
I think that's what I kind of held on to, because there is so many couples that suffer through infertility, and you hear those numbers, but it is the most lonely thing you'll ever go through, because it doesn't matter somebody else's story, it's not yours. And you are stuck in this endless cycle on a monthly basis, that you are on your highs looking forward to something, on your lows dealing with hormones. It is nonstop on your mind 24/7, and everybody has advice. And so it is very lonely and isolating no matter what. And very hormonally stressful and regulatory. So
empathy.
Right. And one of the things that I did decide, and that I am actually very proud of looking back in retrospect, because my story ended in a happy ending with 4 kids, with also a surprise. At 40 years old, I got a surprise birth. So again, you can never control your planning on babies and when they come. But one of the things I decided was that either we were going to have children one day or we weren't. And I wasn't going to let my whole life revolve around being infertile at the time. And so we really made conscious decisions where we had trips that would come up, and you feel bad if you choose to if you forego a treatment for that month to go on a trip. Because then you're like, in your head, do I really want it that bad? If I really wanted it, I would sacrifice everything. And so we made conscious decisions of pausing treatments for a month and spending that money on a trip. And I thought, well, this will be the only time that my husband and I will have this time together. So hopefully one day we're going to have children, whether that's through infertility treatments, through adoption, whatever method. But this is going to be the only time that we're going to have each other. And so we did take advantage of that.
Oh, that is wise advice, even though you're saying, that each situation is so unique and different that you can't really give advice like, oh, just, put your chin up. It's not like that kind of advice. But the advice is your partner is still so core and central, and to not let that dissipate and that relationship to lighten. Well, what about advice for friends or family? If we have a friend or family member that is struggling with infertility, what was helpful from people that did or did not support you that we could be cognizant of?
Ironically, effective communication. One is not assuming that whatever your behavior is what they want out of you. Sometimes people feel like they have to avoid certain topics, or they can't celebrate their wins or their pregnancies with somebody who is going through infertility problems. And sometimes you do have to navigate those scenarios. But the foremost and foremost is the person going through infertility is on their mind 24/7. It never leaves. It's like if you've ever been pregnant with morning sickness. People would ask you, how you doing? And you're like, at best, it's okay. Like, I'm sick every day. Stop asking. Like, I'm just doing best.
Yeah.
So it's really asking them how you can help support them.
What works for them.
Don't assume that you know the best way, or that your friend wants this advice, or you heard this story, or this is what worked for them. Ask them, do they want to hear If I hear stories or advice, do you ever want to? If I find articles, are you up for that? You just ask them how you can best support them.
That actually kind of brings me back to your quote that we talked about a little bit with your entrepreneurial spirit of having the kindling ready for the lightning to strike, right? Because I think having a relationship that is honest and candid, that you can openly ask, what works best for you? What do you need?
Right.
And then whatever direction it ends up going, which is a lot of times out of our hands, then, that is the lightning that's striking.
Right.
Then you're prepared to kind of.
Right. And hormones play such a big role. Sometimes you're doing well. Like I remember I was happy for everybody having children, and my younger siblings had children before me. My husband's younger siblings had children before him, and we were fine with it, until one time there was like one baby announcement that just threw me over the edge, and I felt so bad. But again, you have to forgive yourself, and you cannot control your reactions all the time. So yes, it stinks and it's going through hard things, and you can be happy for everybody else's, them getting pregnant or not getting pregnant isn't going to affect your path that you're on. So. And
you have four now, and boys or girls?
2 boys, 2 girls.
2 boys, 2 girls. Yep. And how old?
My oldest is 15. She'll be 16 next month. We just practiced parallel parking yesterday.
Great.
There were tears involved.
Yes.
And my 2 boys are in the middle school and last year of elementary school, and they are quintessential boy football gamers. And then my youngest Sawyer came around. She was a surprise 40th. That was a hard year, 2015. My husband got laid off of the job that moved us here in January. February, we found out we were pregnant, and March, I turned 40.
So much.
And you're like,
so many things in 1 year.
You're like, what?
I think I'm only supposed to have one life change per year.
What is going on? And she is my favorite little spunky kid. She's so funny though. I will ask her, like, are we besties for life? And she's like, I can't commit to that yet.
How old is she?
8.
8.
I can't make you any promises.
Just you wait. She's going to be like when she's 15.
All right. Okay.
Well, what do you think, all of your children, of course, I'm sure, are so proud of you and would continue to be as they grow up, right? As your 8-year-old becomes to see. But what do you, for your daughters specifically, your 16-year-old and your 8-year-old, what do you think that you'd love for them to say about you when they are 35?
It's interesting you say this too, because this is a hard balance for moms. I think my mom was an entrepreneur, and so she created, my father passed away when we were in middle school. She had 3 young kids at home. She started a cross-stitch store. She was always a crafter. Due to that, we came home by ourselves a lot. And so that's very common in the Gen X generation. We're all latchkey kids. And so for me, that was something that I did not want for my kids. I really wanted to be home for them. And so we made that, and I was able to do that with the online business that I was able to work from my home. This past summer, and so the business was thriving. It did really well at the time. My husband was working for me when we bought our house, so we joke that it's the house the Bows bought. And just last summer, I started getting busier and bringing on more clients and going to more meetings. And my 11-year-old son was like, "Mom, you have a job?" What?
Why, yes, I do.
What? Like, I've had this shop since before you were born. And so it was super interesting on this. I gave them the life that I wanted them to have. I was able to draw a line between business and work and home life. But then he took it for granted that dad went to work and I was staying at home. And so it was really interesting of like, what do I want them to think? Because it's not easy. There's tons of sacrifices. I don't feel like I want to put that on them, that I'm sacrificing, but I want them to appreciate that I am capable of building something successful.
Yes.
And so a lot of times, though, I don't think it has to come through necessarily me. One of the things we try to point out, especially with the boys, and especially coming from our generation, is pointing out other women who are doing first. And when there's female referees on the NFL, or there's female referees on their team. I'm so excited for them to acknowledge and see that that wasn't always the case.
No.
And so trying to raise allies on that of, my kids don't get home cooked meals all the time. My house is pretty cluttered a lot of the time. They have to run their chores. I don't get to go to everything. But it's okay because they have a foundation of trust, love, and support from me that it's fulfilled in other ways. And I think a lot of moms find a lot of guilt in that situation. They can't be all the places at once, and really realizing that nobody can, regardless, and still take care of themselves by purely sacrificing themselves for the kids. So even if you're a stay-at-home mom, you have children you've got to take care of, or you're in a hospital giving birth, like there's always something that you're balancing out or giving up. It's one of the things of they're part of the conversation, and they realize what I'm doing for the greater good of the family or the greater good for me and my mental health. And so they learn how to cook, and they learn that chicken nuggets are great.
They're delicious, and I'm independent, and I'm resilient, and I can do things. I think that's great. Do you think that, so the way, when you were speaking, I'm sitting here thinking that I bet she is an amazing trainer. And your company now, Warner Communication, talk to me a little bit about that work.
I love it so much. So DISC literally changed my life because, and I feel like especially with women, we are raised to believe that we are supposed to be a certain way. Whatever our parents believe, if you're raised in high religion or high demand religion, women are always told that this is the way that's normal and this is the way you're supposed to be. And so with effective communication, and men too, so men and women both, with effective communication, it's a simple behavior test of where your natural behavior lies. So it's really a simple of, we can adjust, and we are raised in civilized society, so we know how to behave in certain ways and things that are dependent on us. But in times of crisis and conflict, we often go back to our natural behavior styles.
Sure.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think so somebody like me who's naturally rebellious, who naturally wants to be in charge, and I want my ideas heard, and you're raised in a time and place and told that you're supposed to be meek and mild and humble, then when that doesn't come natural to you, you think there's something wrong with you. Or women who are naturally analytical and direct have a hard time being vulnerable. So they have a harder time making female friendships. So that they internalize is that's their problem. Like it's got to be me. It's
got to be me.
When it's really
why can't I behave like that? The expectations.
Right. Why can't I have more female friends? Why do I relate more with men? And the same scenario happens to men who are naturally emotionally reactive to things. Like we cannot help emotions. Emotions aren't bad or good, but men growing up that feel emotions are told not to feel those emotions, to suck it up, to don't be a crybaby, to man up. And so they are taught that that's not a good thing. And so then they go into leadership roles, suppressing that natural emotional ties. And so they think there's something wrong with them too. So I love it when I get to go into teams and partnerships and really have the aha moments of like, oh, I am normal. Like it's not just me struggling with all of these fears and barriers we put on ourselves. It really is a fourth of the population of humans fall into these different categories, and we adjust and address. And I was able to learn when I went to DISC training. For me, my husband would love at first sight. For me, it took him a while to believe me on that one, but I did wear him down. And then finally, we got married, and the first year of our marriage was the hardest ever because what was adorable and fun and opposite when we were dating wore on us when we were married. And when I was given the position and promoted at Universal Studios, they made me go through a DISC training.
Oh, that's when the light went on.
It literally changed my life because also I am naturally dominant behavior style naturally. So I tend to be more masculine in my thinking. And so when you're raised in the 90s by male supervisors and you take on those masculine dominant roles, you don't know how to necessarily be assertive without being aggressive when you're taking on different qualities. So it was really great for me to learn, oh, I can soften up. I don't have all these qualities naturally, but I really appreciate those and I want to develop those qualities.
That's a big part of, in Women Who Succeed. We'll have to have you help us with some of the monthly workshops or the conference with these young women, because a lot of it is even when you recognize where you are and you're building your self-confidence, you're building your leadership skills, there's still an awareness that you can become more assertive, or you can become softer, or you can be more diplomatic. It's still a journey. We're all trying to grow and improve.
Yes.
But I love how you describe it, because the awareness is not, but you're not fitting the stereotype, so you're bad or wrong. That's not what we're saying. Mm-hmm. What we're saying is, how
it's common.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
You remind me when you're talking about the woman who broke all the rules, is what kept running through my head. A woman who broke all the rules, right there.
Yeah, and so there's nothing wrong. And I think that's really interesting, especially in like religious situations where it is so great to give and to share and to serve others. But for different of us, it comes from different places. So some women are naturally selfless, and so they put other people before them. So service really fuels them. Where there's other women who aren't selfless, they have bigger egos, but they also feel useful. Like they can do this and they want to help and they want to serve because they have the ability and they know that they can be counted on. And if they dedicate their time, it's going to work out.
Right.
So both scenarios help and serve others, but only one is taught and expected. And if you don't feel that way, you're like, why is it so hard for me?
Right.
When in actuality, it's just as good.
Well,
it's just different ways of...
Both should be valued.
Right, both should be valued.
Well, in our last little bit, as we wrap up, are there any final thoughts specifically that resonate with you in your leadership development, all your training, a couple of takeaways that you'd like to share with the women that are watching today's podcast?
With women, specifically, one of the things that I noticed coming from Florida and coming from Orlando, which is naturally diverse in the areas that I grew up in, and that in Orlando, moving to Utah, where there is an 85% majority of Caucasian and even more men in all the rooms. I did not realize that until about last year when I started showing up to the spaces and in the rooms.
Surprise!
I know. As my friend Deb says, I was smacked in the face with a lot of men, and even more specifically, a lot of white men. And there's nothing wrong with having a high demographic because of genealogy, because of genetics. But going forward, it needs to be something that is not trying to be safeguarded. So inclusion is so important. But I think what gets left out of the conversation is that people that are in the majority and have always been in the majority don't really notice or even consciously aware of a lack of minorities faces in the room, whether that's minority of color or minority of gender or minority of sexuality. They just don't know it because they've never had to notice it. And I think that's one of the things in Utah is there's just never been a thing. Everybody just is, we're welcoming and we're opening and everybody's welcome, but nobody's really willing to get out of their own comfort zone to go and approach inclusion as a way of not only inviting people into your comfort zone, but you being willing to be uncomfortable and going into other people's comfort zones. So one of the challenges with that is with women, they have never felt like they fit in those spaces in the room, so they stop going. It's not worth their effort. But I really want to challenge more women to show up in those rooms and efforts so that more women can show up and be in those rooms, and there's more friendlier faces. And so it's a trickle effect of maybe there's one, then there's two, then there's four, then there's six, because they start becoming more comfortable because there's more women in the room. So it gets uncomfortable. And in Utah, I say we just don't have the luxury to not do it. We don't have the luxury to step out of our comfort zones. And I think that just for a long time, it's just been comfortable. And so on both sides, we need to notice when there are people missing.
I love that. Let's be a little uncomfortable.
Be a little bit so that we can get comfortable.
Right.
Because we just don't have the luxury
Love it.
to not pay attention.
Well, Robin, thank you so much for spending some
Thanks
time
for
with
having
me
me.
today.
This was such a fun conversation.
And especially thank you for sharing that very personal piece of the journey that you and your husband went on with infertility. It really means, I think it's going to mean a lot to a lot of young women and women that are going to watch today. And let's remember Warner Communication.
Thank you. Yes.
Do we have a website?
WarnerCommunication.com or RobinHuling.com. It's always fun when people are impressed that I got my own website. So that's a huge info. Google your name and see if you can buy your own domain name.
I bet you Trent Beth Murray is available.
That is something. All my kids have their own domain names. So you don't know where you're going in the future. Is get your name. Whatever you want to do is own your name. It's so cheap.
That's such good advice. I'm going to get back to tell my sons.
Yeah. All my kids have their own domain name. It's such a cheap investment, but to own your own name.
Good. Well, thank you all for joining us today for the We Hear Her podcast for Women Who Succeed. And I look forward to having you join us again next time. Thank you for taking the time to hear her. Join our efforts and learn more about Women Who Succeed at womenwhosucceed.org.